All right. So our today's topic is proposed types and quality of assessment. Yeah, this is going to be meeting 3. All right. So the purpose of assessment. We last week we talked about assessment. We talked about the definitions of assessment. We talked about how assessment differ from tests and so on, and evaluation. So we need to make a kinds of narrow definitions of assessment, and finally we can find to we can go to the definition of assessment. And now we are going to talk about the purpose of the assessment. There are 2 kinds of assessment that you have to see. People recognize this as formative and summative assessment, or in bahasa Indonesia penilaian formatif dan sumatif. And those 2 terms are very popular amongst the teachers. So, but I have to look at the definitions of those 2 terms. So, assessment for learning, this the books that we use now, said that there are two kinds of assessment: assessment for learning and assessment of learning. This is based on the purpose of the assessment. Assessment for learning refers to the process of seeking and interpreting evidence for use by students, and that teachers to decide where students are in their learning process. So in this case, you have to interpret anything from the students and teachers in the classroom. So assessment mean the process when you see the process of teaching and learning, then you get the data from there, and then it means that you actually need to interpret whether you can to describe or interpret, or in this case you have to describe what's happening in the classroom, in the learning and teaching. And in this case you need evidence, in the forms of interview, in the forms of observation, and so on, and the evidence can see what is happening there, and you will finally see where your students are in the learning process. Are they achieving the goals, or are they still or do they still need anything to learn, or needs enforcement, reinforcement, and so on? This is called assessment for learnings. So assessment for learnings mean formative tests. It means that you, in the middle of the learning process, decide to check where your students are in the continuance of learning process. And the second one is the so-called assessment of learning. Difference on the word for and of. Yeah, of learning means session that happens after the learning has occurred to determine whether the learning has happened. So in the end of the learning, you have to make sure that your learning is achieving the goal, right? So in this case, you have to make sure that your learning is okay, your learning is successful. You can learn what you are going to, you can achieve what you are going to achieve in the learning. Yeah, you see the difference. The first one is in the middle of the process, you need to see where your students are in the learning. It means that in the learning process, you have to see the progress of your students. Okay, this is assessment for learnings. Assessment of learning is, in the end, you have to make sure whether you can achieve the goal or not, the goal of learning, of course. Okay, so this is called progress. The first one is called progress assessment, or formative assessment, or assessment for learning. The second one is assessment of learning, or final assessment, or summative assessment. You get it? Okay, good. Now, there are different purposes out of two terms, summative and formative. we can also see assessment in different purposes. So first one is assessment to find progress. Okay, the same thing with the formative, right? The second one is assessment to encourage learners. Encourage learners to when you need to encourage your learner, you have to give some assessments, right? So see the assessment, or you can make a kind of test or something like portfolio assessment or whatever. But the purpose is to encourage the students to learn. And then assessment to find out learning difficulties or diagnose. In this case, you can diagnose the difficulties in the middle or in the end. It's up to you, but the purpose is to find the difficulty. So by giving the test, you will know which one is difficult, which one is easy of your materials. And then assessment to find out achievement. This is the end. Learning a formative or a summative assessment. In the end, try to find the achievement. And then assessment to place learners. When you want to divide learners into classes, you need to place. There is a placement test, right? So you need to assess. And then assessment to find out proficiency. This is general. What is it? General test or general assessment. So when you want to know your English, then you can take a kind of assessment, global or general assessment of English. Okay, now the instruction, you have to know the instruction, student center, and administrative. This is things related to assessment, right? The purpose of the assessment. So in the instruction, what does assessment serve in the instructions? I think you know that assessment serves to gather information about student understanding skills in this case. So you have to get all information from the classes to know your students' understanding and skills by giving assessment. Okay. And then student center assessment should refer to process of identifying student strengths and weaknesses. It means that the student center assessment. It means that you test your student, or you assess your students by finding the process of identifying your students' strengths and weaknesses. Administrative, I think assessment requires teachers to make judgment about student learning. So by having such kinds of understanding, you can see that there are purposes of assessment. You have more types of assessment like this. For example, according to the item format, you have multiple choice, you have true, false, you have matching, and so on. All are assessment or tests, right? So in the format task format, you have essay, summary, writing, reports, until you have integrated tasks and so on. So there are so many things you can read it in your book. And then actually this is the important point. The important point is that in deciding to see the assessment, or in providing assessment, you have to at least understand that the so-called assessment task, task. Teacher generate evidence by giving learners tasks that involve language use. Task is something like situation or language instructions or language use that you give for the students to do or to be, right? So in this case, when you give your students assessments, you need to know the instruction, the guidance, what to do, the instruction first, and then the input or materials that learners need. The inputs mean the materials of the test, and the expected response. This is called what is it expected to do. Essay. If it is essay, then you are supposed to make a kinds of key keywords or key answer key or something like what is it? key answer or something like the key of the answer, so or the response or options of the answer, something like that. And then in the materials, you have to see what kinds of materials in the syllabus or the purpose of the learning. In the instruction, you have to write down the what the students should do. And then you have after you get the assessment task, you need to know the assessment task specification. So make it before writing your assessment. This is a kinds of specification. What kinds of aspects of language do you want to assess in this case? All right. This is a table of specification, the sample of specifications. For example, skill by section order. It means that you have something like genre or question vocabulary or whatever you want to assess in the assessment. And then times, and then weight. Popot, yeah, weight is how many percent do you want to give per aspects in this case. So this will tells you, this will tell you the what kinds of focus you will see in this test or in this assessment. And number of items, so you have items here, and then task type. Task type means something like written summary or multiple choice response, or this is a written response to topics or whatever. And resources mean the text come from, where the text comes from, something like this. So before doing the test, so before making assessment, you have to see these kinds of table of assessment or table of specification. You know, this is very important. This is the so-called kisi-kisi in bahasa Indonesia, kisi-kisi soal. So aspects of language do you want to assess? Times, minutes or times, weights, weight mean the portion or the focus of your aspects. Items, item is the statement or the questions. Task types, this is the possible answer, and there's resources, this is the resource or reference of the text if you need to use the text. All right, so after you get the assessment, you need to see whether your assessment is qualified or not. So the quality of assessment depends very much on the alignment, the agreement with the outcomes. It means that alignments means whether your test is in line with the learning outcomes do you want to achieve. So if you want to achieve the mastery of past tense, for example, in grammar, then your test should be giving the applications or implementations of tenses in a sentence, right? If your test is vocabulary mastery, then the outcome should be the student can or are able to master the vocabulary. So the test should be in vocabulary mastery, something like that. This is the so-called alignment. Validity, you have to measure what is supposed to measure. What I mean is, so when you want to write to assess writing, then the activities of the test should be writing, right? Not choosing or not thinking or not reading. When you want to assess reading, then the activities of the testees should be reading, something like this. Reliability is be consistent in the result. If your assessment can result in similar or consistent results, consistent score for every times every different student do the test, then it means that your test is reliable. Fairness, equal opportunity to demonstrate achievement. So I think You have to make sure that your assessment can can have the same or equal opportunity for the testees to demonstrate their achievement. You have to be objective in this case. Consequences related to washback. If your test last week we were talking about washback test, assessment washback, whether your test can give contributions to the betterment of the teaching. This is consequences. And practicality and efficiency is the effort and time. So need more time or short time to do the test or the assessment. So you have to be efficient in this case. Don't give too many tests, but a very short time. Don't give too few items in a very long time. So you have to be able to calculate in this case how many items, how much does the time it needs. How long does the test need for the testees in this case. So I think this is all are under the quality of assessment, so the criteria for quality of the assessment. Now we are going to talk about what to assess now. What to assess means is something like learning objective and learning outcomes and learning materials. Yeah. So before knowing this kinds of thing, I think you need to know the general instructions, instructional objectives by Bloom taxonomy. This is very popular concepts, I think. Just we have to know the so-called high order thinking skill and low order thinking skills, right? So in this case, you have to see the levels of thinking skills according to Bloomfield. This picture shows you that in thinking skill or thinking to mind, everyone has such kinds of thing, from the remember to create. This is the new one. So using verb, this is the last one. I mean the previous one. The concept of Bloom, the new concept of Bloomfield, Bloom taxonomy means creating, evaluating, analyzing, and so on. So, for example, if you want to know your student remembering skills, it means that you recall knowledge from the long battery memory. It means that they just mention something or whatever. But if you want to put the information together in an innovative way, you are supposed to make your student be able to create something like this. So this is the verbs that can be used from the remembering to creating. Just have a look at this. There are so many books talking on this case. You can search in Google and then try to find the verbs from the Bloom taxonomy. It is very important because you have to know which one is the so-called high order thinking skill and low order thinking skill. If you put these three different domains, applying, understanding, and remembering, it means that you use the verbs of applying and the verbs of understanding, the verbs of remembering, as I told you earlier in this case, this one. This means that you are considering with low order thinking skills. So here we have to be ready for the next session. If you use verbs from this, the other thinking skill, it means that creating, evaluating, analyzing, you are under the high order thinking skill. So just have a look at this one. Okay. So for example, if you are supposed to have learning process using correlating, for example, it means that you are analyzing under the analyzing domain. So you are under the high order thinking skill. But if you just for example, finding or defining, copying, listening, and so on, you are under the low order thinking skill. So your items in a test, your item in the assessment should be high order thinking skill. Yeah? If you can use low order thinking skill for the bridge, yeah, before going to the to the high order thinking skill. So language, what about language in terms of language? In terms of language skills, I mean language, you have language knowledge and language skills. Things that you have to assess is the language knowledge and language skill. Language skill, there are 4 skills, and then language knowledge, there are two knowledge, knowledge of organizational, knowledge of pragmatic, something like this. So if you see the vocabulary in this case, you see the syntax, phonology, and so on, it means so you come to know you are supposed to have your students able to know the language skill. But if you want your student to read, for example, then it is the language skill. So there are 2 different poles, right? Okay. This is the so-called what is it? The 13 curriculum. We have something like this in Merdeka curriculum. I think we have different kinds of learning goals, something like this. But essentially they are the same. So indicators, kompetensi dasar, standar kompetensi, those 2 previous terms are under the so-called learning objective or learning objective or learning outcomes, something like this. So in defining learning outcomes or learning objective, you have to see the audience, behavior, condition, and degree. See those 4 aspects in your learning, in the sentence of your learning objective. For example, this one, melalui kegiatan tanya jawab dan diskusi kelompok. This is conditions, right? All are learning objectives. Peserta didik is the audience, menganalisis is the behavior. Try to see, menganalisis, does it belong to low order thinking or high order thinking skill? Just look at it in the previous Bloom fields or Bloom taxonomy, right? And then dengan benar is the degree. This is how to formulate the tujuan pembelajaran, and tujuan pembelajaran is very important, or learning objective is very important for you before you make a test or make assessment, because your assessment should be based on this tujuan pembelajaran or learning objectives. So material development or materials is also important for before you go to the test, before you assess someone, or before you make an assessment, because between materials and assessment should be in line. So every time you ask a question or you make a kind of assessment, or you assess someone, learners, you have to make sure that the materials are covered in your materials, in your assessment. So don't ever make a kinds of test or assessment which are not in line with the materials. Okay, and the materials are something like this. So in a big picture, you can see that English assessment and assessment and materials are two inline things that you have to be or to take in mind. So there are 3 different things in assessment that you have to keep in mind. Bloomfield taxonomy, this is instructional, general instructional, general instruction or general instructional domain, language content or language knowledge, and language skills. Jadi di dalam assessment itu harus ada 3 ini. The first one is Bloomfield, sampai mana Anda sampai level high order thinking, hot atau lots, Anda akan memberi assessment lot atau assessment hot. Nanti kita latihan nanti pertemuan berikutnya. Ini termasuk yang hot itu yang mana, yang lot yang mana, itu yang berbicara this aspects. And then in language you have to language knowledge and language skill. Language knowledge talks about grammar, vocabulary, pragmatics, social-linguistic, and so on. Language skill, contained reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Right? So if you want to assess speaking, then you are assessing language skill. But terms that you use or the verbs that you use to ask should be in line with the Bloomfield taxonomy, whether they belong to low order thinking skill or high order thinking skill. Okay, so in short, we can see there's materials here, development materials here, assessment is here, right? So three different things: materials, language skill and components, language skill and knowledge, and then taxonomy, Bloom taxonomy. This is your goal of teaching, or indicators, objective, learning outcome, and so on. Things that you put as your assessment, your criteria to achieve the goals, and this is your assessment. Okay. All right. So the very important thing is this one, and then now we go to the so-called consideration while constructing a test. So I think it's not I mean, we can discuss this later on, but I just want to make sure that you understand this point. Okay. So first of all, you have to know this one, because the final test, or my final test, or my final assignment will be like this. Make a kinds of test specification, and then you make an assessment. An assessment should be like this. It consists of assessment task, ya. Nanti tugasnya seperti itu. Jadi tugasnya itu membuat spesifikasi dulu, kemudian baru membuat assessment task yang isinya instruction, input materialnya apa, kemudian responnya apa yang kepada siswa. Bisa multiple choice, bisa essay, bahkan bisa observation, something like this. Kan kalau observation ada tes namanya non-test ya. Later on we talk about that. This is the so-called alternative assessments. Okay,